Hi everyone, I appreciate y'all taking some time to watch today's video. In today's video, I received a comment in my last video from a subscriber, and he was hoping that I would do a video on wake baits. The whole topic of wake baits, throwing big wakes for big fish, and just kind of get my thoughts on wake baits. So I wanted to get this video out there, and I do really appreciate the comment and you reaching out for that. Gives me great ideas and it gives me more content as far as what you, my subscribers here on YouTube, are very interested in seeing, learning about, and getting my opinion on. So I really appreciate the comment, and moving forward, if anyone has any ideas, questions, comments, or even you'd like to get my thoughts on a topic, I'll try my best to do a video on it. I guess depending on what the topic is, I'll do my best to try to make one though. But let's hop right in this. So wake baits as a whole, I really enjoy throwing wake baits, love throwing topwater. I think everyone, when you get started bass fishing, no matter how old you are, whether you're throwing the little hula popper or the zoom or the head and super spook or a buzz bait, something like that, everyone thinks about those massive topwater bites. Probably some of the most exciting things, especially when you're young and you're just getting into fishing, and then you get to see this giant vacuum of this giant largemouth, big aggressive smallmouth come up and take your bait and run with it. One of the most exciting and addicting parts of fishing. Okay, so just like swim baits are, the big wake bait is just the upsized version. So this is the topwaters that I kind of throw, and I'm going to kind of start on the smaller end, and we'll work our way up to the bigger end of this. So let's get started with kind of my shad wakes, because this is kind of where I'm probably going to start most of my wake bait season. And before I even get into baits, let's kind of talk about the seasons that I personally throw the wake. It will work year-round. There's no doubt about that. There's been proven fish catches across the country. A wake bait, if you give it enough time, will work year-round. And honestly, from my understanding, based on what I've seen, a lot of people, especially in the colder months, bigger wake baits. The 10, 12-inch wake is kind of where it's at. Now, personally, partially due to a lot of my lakes around here, during the winter months, so many of my fish go really, really deep on highland reservoirs. I don't really throw wake baits that much in the wintertime. I start kind of bringing them into my lineup in the spring. They have a very heavy, they're very much apparent during the summer months. The summer is probably my favorite wake bait season, and then the fall is good too, especially when they're schooling, because you can keep that wake bait above them and they're feeding up, and you'll get these massive topwater explosions during the fall. So, but it's a year-round bait. You can absolutely throw this year-round. You just have to have the commitment to be able to throw it year-round. And that's honestly what it boils down to, is how much are you personally willing to throw this bait given the season. About 2-3 years ago, when Dad and I were first starting Perkins Custom Swim Baits, we got on a rat bite that was phenomenal, and I really have not been able to duplicate that in the recent years. But at the same time, I've really been throwing glides a lot in the summertime. That's just a personal preference. That's not to say that the wakes were not working. It's just kind of what I was doing, and just kind of, if you're only one person on the boat, you can really only throw one rod at a time. So I just kind of had the glide bait, and I was working on the Jethro and everything like that. So trying to get that into production. So I really was working on perfecting that. So I kind of didn't throw wake baits as much last year. I did keep them on the boat, especially during the summer. Like I'm saying, if you had to look at my boat during the summertime, you're going to see a wake bait on there every single time I go to the lake. But let's get kicked off with some of the baits and kind of how I like to throw them, what's the difference between them, and why I pick one over the other. And then we'll kind of go into sound. Sound, I really don't talk about sound as much with kind of glide baits, because glides, you kind of want a glide to be a little bit more of a natural kind of presence in the water. I mean, it's always going to have some sound, I'm sure, with the joint and everything, but you're looking for more of that fluid, kind of smooth, subtle approach. Whereas a wake, you can go both ends of the spectrum. You can go super natural, quiet wake, and then you can go really, really loud and obnoxious. So let's kind of talk through these. So the first one, this is what I call the hot rod shad. So this bait, and when it was built, it was kind of designed as just a multi-joint bait. And multi-joints, they're, depending on how they're weighed, you can wake a multi-joint, and you can also burn a multi-joint underneath the water subsurface. So it just depends on how they're built. This one in particular, it is weighed to kind of go down, slow sink. But the reason for that is I wanted it to slow sink, that way I could reel it a little bit faster to be able to wake it faster. I wanted it to look like a shad was trying to run away from its prey, and it was V-ing the top. Everyone's been out on the lake and they see how that shad is on top of the lake running from something. And I mean, around here, honestly, it's most of the time smallmouth chasing shad, and those little shad are running for their life, literally. So this is what that bait was really designed for, it was trying to imitate that. We have a lot of threadfin, gizzard in our lakes, depending on which lake around here we go to. We've also got some trout and things like that. This is typically more on that gizzard and, threadfin a little bit. Threadfin's a smaller bait fish, but in some ways, I think that even because of how this is spaced, if you kind of see that, to me, it's kind of like they could even interpret each joint as a separate bait fish. So it's almost like you're kind of fishing an Alabama rig, except you're fishing a wake bait. But it does have a large presence in the water, and it comes up to the top. Now, where kind of would I throw this? Now, I'm a little bit more on the, I'll take a risk for it, but I love throwing these around any sort of laydowns, branches. With an exposed hook bait, you are going to run a little bit more risk on that than like a lipped bait. And we'll get into the lip baits here in a minute. But it just depends upon kind of how much you want to play the odds there. But definitely, if you're like on long tapering points, if you're fishing a saddle, fishing island tops or humps, these giant, well, not necessarily giant, this is only about a 7-inch bait, but just baits that do a really fluid, straight action are great. You don't need the lip, because oftentimes that lip can interfere with your hookup ratio. I've had success on both sides, definitely if I've been throwing a lip, but at the same time, it can maybe cause you to miss a few fish. So it's up to your prerogative there. The lip really helps you come through cover a lot better, especially when you're fishing wood. And we fish, a lot of wood on these lakes. That is our primary, cover for these fish when we're fishing the wake is definitely wood. But so this is kind of the hot rod shad. This is just a multi-joint that, it's weighed a little bit to slow sink. But the reason I wanted that is so I could give it a little bit more speed. When I got it on top, I could pull it faster. So that was kind of the thought process there, and that's kind of how I fish it. And they will mow them down. They will catch them. You don't have to worry about it. Thinking about it like this too. That bait and these kind that I'm talking about where they can really run, really move, those are going to be your warmer weather wake baits. Think about that the same way you would like your glide versus your multi-joint, like You know, the most famous probably being like the bull shad. You know, that's a burn and stop kind of bait. It's a very aggressive lashing out kind of action that those fish do to get that. Well, it's the same deal with the wake. If you're fishing in the colder months, you want something that's going to throw a big wake to draw those fish to it, but you don't want tons and tons of speed, because simply that cold water is going to deter them from trying to actually rise up on it, especially if they're not aggressive or already up shallow. And like I was saying, you know, so much of this depends upon the lake. You know, down in Texas, where the lakes are shallower than they are here in the mountainous regions of Tennessee, our lakes go plus 100 feet is a norm in some of these creek channels, versus some areas of Texas, I know, you know, your average depth is probably between 10 and 20 feet. It just depends upon the lake. Me personally, that's why I was saying I don't really throw these during the winter time, just because my fish go so deep. I can target them with a lot better baits for that kind of lake than I can with a wake. But going on to the next one, this is just a couple of the different shad wakes. You know, the shad spawn is coming, and I'm going to do a video dedicated to baits I throw in the shad spawn, and this is one of them. You know, this is just one of those that I like really well for myself. It's a floater. This is a floating bait, and as you can tell, it's got a pretty good sized bill on it. This bait, it will do both. So this is one of those baits that's kind of like that mixture of a wake and crank. You can wake it on top, and it's going to give a very fluid wake. So if you can kind of tell the difference between a 2-joint and a 3-joint, and I'm going to kind of do it like this, you can see you get a complete U out of a 3-joint. You get, let's just call that a 60-degree-ish angle. You can get more of a fluid action out of a multi-piece. This bait actually also gets a lot more head knock than the other one. So for me personally, I enjoy throwing this bait a lot more during like your shad spawn, during your early morning topwater bites, if I'm going to throw a multi-joint. This one does have a bill, so it comes through cover really well, or you know, different trees. You can definitely crank it down, and you can pull this thing on the ends of trees. So you're throwing it past, you crank it down, you pause it on those tree branches. But that's really getting us away from wake baiting. That's kind of getting into crank downs, and we'll save that for another video another time. But so going back to the wake, those are two different ones. I want to introduce this bait. This is a new rat that I'm working on, and this thing hopefully will get a lot of use this year. I just didn't get time to finish it last year, but as you can tell, that right there is what I've been looking for out of a resin bait. I personally believe sound matters a lot. And by sound, it's this deep knock of a sound. And I don't know why, but that sound drives fish crazy, and they will attack it. And rat bites are some of the most aggressive bites you ever encounter. They do not mess around, and they will absolutely, you can tell that you've got a ratfish on. It's typically a mean fish. It does not like that, and it's going for it. But now, so with the rat, you're not necessarily always imitating a rat per se. You know, it could be a muskrat, it could be a ground squirrel, it could be a gray squirrel, it could be maybe a small beaver even, an otter. It doesn't have to be per se a rat, it's just everyone calls it a rat. But when these things make that noise and they're swimming on the top of the water, it drives fish crazy, and they will attack. So y'all stay tuned. Definitely keep a look on the Facebook and Instagram page as far as how these baits end up coming out, because I'm going to try my best to get them ready for summer, and hopefully you all get to see some explosive fish catches. And definitely be watching the YouTube, because I'll get some of those cast and catches on here too. But let's go into where I spend most of my time. And I know we're 15 minutes in, and I'm just now kind of getting to where I like to throw a wake bait. If I had to go to the lake today, well, today's kind of cool. If I had to go to the lake about 2 days ago or about 3 days from now, and I wanted to throw a wake bait, I'm going to probably spend my time with these two. Now, what these are, and the reason that I picked these over everything else, is number one, I've had the most success out of these baits of any other bait, hands down. Now, you're going to look at these and you're going to think these things are huge, and they are big, but they're not over the top big. So here is one, and here is the other. So the bottom one, the brown, that is your wooden rat. These are both made of wood, and that is part of the, you know, I don't know if it's the nostalgia of it or what it is, but there is something about wooden baits with summertime and with topwater. You know, these are old school kind of baits. This bait right here, this is the longest bait I've ever caught a fish on. It's a 12-inch bait. Let's see here. And for reference, here's the hot rod shad. It's 7 inches. So as you can kind of see, it's a big bait. And what I mean by 7 inches is to the resin, not including the tail. But it's a big bait. Weighs, I think, about 5 to 6 ounces. It's a big bait. It's a lot of weight to throw. And honestly, that was some of the reason as to why I didn't throw it all the time, is just because it's so heavy. You would get pretty fatigued. However, that kind of gets more into the rods, and we can touch base with rods here in just a minute, but you want to be able to throw it all day long. And that's one of the most important things about a bait of this size. You're not going to run across every single fish in the lake that's willing to commit to a bait that big. So you have to throw it for quite a while to be able to get it. But when you do find them, and you will, and don't think that you're fishing for just one fish. I have fished multiple days with a giant wake bait, and I mean, you have your limit. You've got 5 fish. Your average fish is probably 3 plus. You do not get many fish under 3 pounds. But, you know, you've had a fun day, because you've got a bunch of 3-pound largemouth. Well, 3-pound plus largemouth, I should say that. 3's the smallest. So, but they will absolutely attack these giant wake baits. Now, the rat. I make my rats with a screw on the tail, and the reason I do that is simply because I want you to be able to change the tails, and you can change it to whatever kind of worm. I mean, as you can tell, this is just like a Bass Pro Shop tournament methylate worm. Black, honestly, is probably my favorite color to throw as the tail, because I just think it's the most natural. And then just some sort of, you know, this is just a brown stain. It's a brown walnut or something of that nature. But the key to this, when you're throwing these, oh, and these are the big hooks. These are like the 3/0 giant hooks. Hate to get one of these in you. Definitely, if you try to go wake bait fishing, have a good set of wire cutters, because if you do hook yourself, you might need to cut the hook. But that's just a little bit on fishing safety and preparedness. So when would I throw the big bait over, you know, your others? The way that I kind of look at this, these baits are going to be more so like shad spawn. Post spawn, early spring when the shad are spawning, and, well, I shouldn't say early spring, post spawn, so kind of mid-spring, let's say like the May time frame. That's when these baits are going to really come out to play for me. And like I said, you know, you parallel your banks exactly where the shad spawn's going, and you wake it right with those shad. you know, let's see, cliffs, your boat docks, if you see some shad spawning on some riprap, tree branches, logs, the whole 9 yards. You throw, that is when I would throw that particular style of wake. Okay, and now we've got our rats. So when do you throw the rat? Either size. This one I would say is more so you are looking to just get a bite. This is when you're wanting to really throw this. You're wanting to get more bites. You want to increase number. This is the one that you throw when you're looking for the size. Go bigger. You know, it's still the old adage of, you know, if you want to eliminate smaller fish, you keep upsizing until the small fish quit biting. And it's true. You will eliminate, I mean, when you're throwing this bait, you do not catch many non-keepers. Now, with that being said, you still will catch some, but don't think small fish won't hit a big bait. They definitely will. I don't know how many fish that I've caught that aren't even, you know, to size limit to keep for the lake, but on days like that, you do end up getting frustrated and you upsize to where you'll quit catching small fish, because the small fish, for whatever reason, it feels like small fish will run out and try to outrun bigger fish for the meal. So what ends up happening is they will outrun the big fish, and then they'll catch your bait before the big fish does, and then you end up with a 2-pounder over the, you know, the 8. You'd far rather catch the 8. So that's kind of where I approach it with this. Now, oftentimes I do just start with the big bait, me personally. I'm sure if you're in a tournament situation, you might have to dabble with that a little bit differently. It might be you want to start with a small bait and try to get your limit. But when does that rat really come into play? Okay. To me, the rat bite is best in the summer. You want warm weather. I'm not going to say per se warm water, but warm weather. Because you know, for our lakes around here, so we're part of the TVA system. We're not part of the TVA river system. You know, the Gunnersville, Chickamauga, Watts Bar, all of those chains. We are kind of at the top of that with kind of the first couple of lakes coming out of the mountains. And they vary our lakes a lot, but in the summertime when they get up to full pool, you want them, that is where I would say these baits excel. You want the lake with high water. The reason being is that some of these terrestrial animals, whether they be a rat or a muskrat or an otter or whatever, they'll build their burrows, they'll build everything next to water. Okay, well, when the water comes up, some of those burrows will get flooded. And as a result, the animal has to leave. They're terrestrial, they breathe air like us. So guess what? They end up having to make their home elsewhere. Well, beavers and everything else, they'll swim all around on the surface. They'll have their homes near the water because that's where their food source is too. So just thinking about it from that point of view, you definitely want to be throwing that rat during the summer. It's a great time to throw it. I haven't really personally found a big difference in throwing it like early morning versus in high sun in the middle of the day. I've caught fish both ways. I don't really think they care. Sometimes you may have to pause it, twitch it. Some days it's just a slow, steady retrieve. It just varies based on lake to lake and fish to fish. And that's just kind of a personal game to where you get to play that. So that really is kind of my wakes as far as my rats, my shad styles during the shad spawn, and then, you know, you got the Happy Pappy here, which is a double joint. Now, I like it during the summer too. It goes right with the rat bite. The only difference is kind of really which one I have tied on that I want to throw that day. They will both work. If I'm really getting nitpicky with it and I wanted to, you know, as to which one to use, I'm going to base it a lot on the conditions of the day. as far as do we have a lot of wind or do we have a lot of boat traffic. If you got a lot of boat traffic, I would honestly opt for like the Happy Pappy. You got an extra joint back there to give you a little bit more of a knock, call those fish up a little bit better, especially with wakes hitting the shoreline. And then the Rat during a little bit quieter situations. I really like throwing the Rat early in the morning and then throughout the day, as long as I've got kind of calmer water. I don't know why, but it just seems like in my experience that it has worked really well on that slow, steady retrieve, and you'll hear it. And this gets me into the biggest topic with wakes that I personally am a huge advocate for, is sound. Does sound matter? So me personally, if I were gonna go out to 3 days from now when our weather situation gets better, we just had a cold front overnight, but I would say I would want a really, really good thud, a really, really good knock. And this is why wood is so popular, because wood gives you a unique sound versus resin. This is a resin bait, a little bit lower pitch, and it's not as aggressive in my opinion, not compared to that. This has got its own sound, it's got a different kind of knock. They go wild when they hear that. I don't know what it does to them or why they get so aggressive with it, but if you think about it, our square bills, all of these conventional baits that have like a brass or a tungsten or BBs in it, they've all got some sort of sound chamber typically in them to be able to elicit a noise in dirty water as well as clean water. We opt typically for silent baits in clean water, but they still hit knocking baits as well as top water. Think about a buzz bait, it gives off a lot of noise. So those are some thoughts that I'm just going to leave you with, kind of as far as my opinions go. I love throwing some wake baits. I'm going to try to get back into it a lot more this year. We've gotten to the time where it's getting ready to start here in my area. I've been out to the lake past couple of days, and the glide bait is just now coming back in our area. The fish are finally moving up shallow enough to really commit to it. So let's touch on one more thing, and that is rod, reel, and line, because this varies from angler to angler, and I'll give you my opinion as to why I throw what I do. So rod, it's not going to be much different. You can use your glide bait rod, you can use just a heavy cranking stick depending on how heavy the bait is. Just think that you're using treble hooks, you want the rod to be very parabolic. So next comes to the reel. This is one area that I do still prefer like a 6-to-1 gear ratio. And that can vary 6.3 to 1, 6.5 to 1, but typically that's 6 speed to 1. I do like throwing that because I just feel like it forces me to focus more on the bait and listening to the sound. Because for me, this is the time of year that you don't need to use your live scope. You're not focusing on those deep fish, you're focusing on fish that's related to cover and structure. So what I do is you toss your bait over, bring it out real nice and slow, and all this time when it gets up on top and it's waking, you're listening for when it starts doing its clack or its thud. That's where you got it. That's exactly what you're looking for. But listen, use your ears. Now, lastly is line. I do not throw fluorocarbon whatsoever with any of my wake baits. Fluoro sinks, so I throw that one out the window. Don't really want to have to try to get it to lift it up. That's me personally. I know a lot of people actually use fluoro because it gives them a little bit more sensitivity than mono, but to me it's just you're going to have a harder time keeping that bait doing exactly what you want it to. Now then comes the question between braid and mono or co-poly. So I don't really care for braid as a whole. That's me. I know a lot of guys love braid and it works great for them. And honestly, if I were going to throw a like a big spook kind of bait, kind of like the lunker punker, I would probably throw that on straight braid to maybe like a 3-foot leader. And if I were going to throw a wake bait, I would do the same. It would probably be straight braid to maybe a 3 to 6 foot leader of mono, and I would use a heavy mono. So when I'm throwing these wake baits, I typically throw mine on straight copolymer, and that's one area where I will typically go up to 20 pound, maybe even like the 30 pound big game. I'm not worried about the fish seeing my line in this situation. This is not something I'm too concerned about them seeing line. This is the situation where I want the line's really, really good strength, and I want the line to be able to be a really good shock absorber, because when they hit it, they will hit it so aggressive that you want some shock absorption. All right, now there is another reason, and a very big reason, for the mono at the end, as well as, or just straight braid to mono. And that is that heavy mono is going to float better. Because it floats better, it actually helps a lot reeling the wake bait through the water. You're not looking to crank this bait down for depth. You're needing it to actually stay on water and stay on top of the water and do its thing. So that's why, heavy mono or heavy copolymer, either one, will work really, really well for this technique. And you don't have to worry about line size like you do with glide baits. Glide baits, line size matters so much with glides because it can affect the action and it can affect how the bait sinks. So we won't go into glide baits on this one, but that's why I don't really worry about line size as much. I'm more interested in the thickness for being able to withstand the shock when the bass hits it. And then I actually like it thicker because it helps it float better and it gives the bait a better action, in my opinion. So that's kind of my thoughts on wake baits. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, please leave them down below in the comments. I read every comment. I do my best to respond to everyone, because if you take the time to comment to me, I'm going to take the time to reply back. You all have been an amazing group of people that watch these videos and give me feedback, and I really appreciate that. So I think we'll call it here for wake baits, at least right now. We might do a follow-up to this a little bit later in the summer, after the wake bait bite turns on. And feel free to send me pictures of your all's fish this year, all these big swim bait fish you all are catching. We all live across the country, we live in different areas, and I love hearing as to where is the bite good right now. It's going to be a good year. We are just now getting into the post spawn here in my area. I'm sure everyone is kind of varying right now across the country. I know up north you all are probably still in the pre-spawn. Yeah, I think still probably pre-spawn. I don't think they would have gotten to the spawn yet. We're just now getting to it right now here. So, but hey, I really appreciate everyone taking the time. Once again, if you don't care, please hit that little subscribe button and notification bell. That really helps our channel grow. Please give it a thumbs up. That helps the YouTube algorithm recognize the video and it helps send it out to more people. Feel free to share this video with your friends, your buddies, all your partners that are fishing with you in the tournaments. Share it. I'd love it. And as always, feel free to comment down below. Be more than happy to answer any questions, give you my thoughts. But I really appreciate everyone taking time to watch today's video. I hope you all go out and catch some monster fish this year on the wake bait, and I'll talk to you in the next video.